Hey everyone, welcome back. Whether you're here live or watching later, I really appreciate you tuning in. It means a lot. Now, let's get straight into it. I just got an update about Sam Darnold and the Vikings. Apparently, they're open to bringing him back. That's interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, let me clear something up. This stream is going to be big. Today, I'm putting myself on the record. No more dodging the question. I'm finally sharing my top 5 quarterback picks. If I were the GM, these are the guys I'd go after. Free agency, draft, trade. It doesn't matter. These are my picks. And, hey, I want to hear from you too. As I break down each quarterback, let me know your thoughts. Drop your top 5 in the chat. If you don't like my choices, no worries. Just hear me out first. I'll go over the pros and cons of each player, and then you can decide if I'm crazy or if I'm making sense. Oh, and one more thing. We're also going to talk about free agents we should target outside of our own roster. But that's a discussion for next week's stream. So, let's get started, because this is going to be fun. All right, here we go. Let's talk quarterbacks. Before we get into it, wish me luck. I've got some travel coming up, and you know how airports can be. But for now, let's focus on what really matters. Who should be our next quarterback? Now I see Aaron Rodgers' name popping up in the chat, and trust me, we'll get to that. But first, let's break down my top 5 quarterback picks. And yes, I've got some surprises for you. Starting with number 5, this one is interesting. Sam Darnold. A year ago, nobody thought he'd be this good. He signed a 1-year, $10 million deal, and now, suddenly, the Vikings might want to bring him back. And honestly, I get it. He had a rough start in his career, but then he went to the 49ers, learned under Kyle Shanahan, and boom. He looked like a different player. That's the power of a great system. But here's the real question. Who's the next Sam Darnold? Think about it. A young quarterback, written off by the league, suddenly finding his groove in the right situation. Could we find that guy before everyone else does? I've got a name for you. Zach Wilson. Now, don't freak out just yet. He's only number 5 on my list. Not number 3, not number 2, and definitely not number 1. But hear me out. Wilson was a top draft pick who landed in a messy situation with the Jets. We've seen this story before. A talented player stuck in a dysfunctional organization. But this past year, he took a step back. He sat behind great coaching, learning from Sean Payton, one of the best offensive minds in football. So the real question is, could he be the next comeback story? We'll break it all down. But first, what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the chat. Agree? Disagree? Let's talk. Now here's something to think about. Zach Wilson might be the cheapest option out there. I know. That's kind of funny, right? The idea of finding the next Sam Darnold sounds wild, but hear me out. If there's a chance to grab a young QB for next to nothing, why not do our homework? I've read that the Broncos might want to bring him back, and his market value. 1 year, $3 million. That's nothing for a quarterback. If you want to build a strong team, the best way to do it is to spend less at quarterback and use that money elsewhere. Of course, if you take that route, you'd still need a veteran backup, no doubt about that. But I've always liked Wilson coming out of college. I don't think he ever got a real shot to succeed with the Jets. Put him in the right system, with the right coaching, and who knows? Chip Kelly could do wonders with a player like him. But let's move on, because my number 4 pick is going to be controversial. It all depends on how you feel about starting a rookie quarterback. And this guy, he's not even in the NFL yet. At number 4, I have Shedeur Sanders. Why? Because if he's still available at pick 6, we might actually take him. Among all the quarterbacks coming out this year, he has the highest floor. No character issues, no work ethic concerns. Every coach and teammate who's talked about him says he'll do whatever it takes to be great. Now, let's talk about his game. His athleticism, decent. His arm, okay. His mobility, fine. His pocket presence, needs work. But here's the real question. Was his pocket presence shaky because of a bad offensive line? If so, that's something that can be coached out of him. Only time will tell. Some of you in the chat are already saying he's the most day one ready rookie. And honestly, I agree. That's why I have him at number 4. The way I see it, he reminds me of Mac Jones when he first entered the league. High floor, plug and play. And what happened? They plugged him in, he played, and the team went 10-6 and made the playoffs. The problem? He never got any better after that. And now? He's off the team. So, will Shedeur Sanders be different? That's the real question. But I want to know what you think. Would you take Shedeur at number 6? Let me know in the chat. Alright, so here's my take on Shedeur Sanders. Can he step in right away and make plays? Absolutely. But will he ever become a top 10 quarterback? That's the big question. Or, will he just be another Kirk Cousins? Only time will tell. But here's my biggest concern, and I want you all to vote on this poll because I need to know where you stand. How comfortable are you starting a rookie quarterback? If I'm being completely honest, I don't love the idea. Unless you have no other option, throwing a rookie into the fire isn't always the best move. It depends on the roster, and it depends on the player. But history shows us that the most successful young quarterbacks usually sit for at least part of their first season. If it were up to me, I'd bring in Matthew Stafford and let Sanders sit for at least 1 full season, maybe even 2. Same with Cam Ward or Jackson Dart. None of them should see the field right away. Think about it. Patrick Mahomes sat for a year behind Alex Smith, who was already winning division titles, and when Mahomes finally took over, he was ready. Now look at Green Bay. They went from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. And guess what? Both Rodgers and Love sat behind a veteran before taking over. How often do we see a rookie quarterback come in and instantly dominate like C.J. Stroud or Jaden Daniels? Almost never. It's rare. So yeah, you guys are 100% right. It depends on the team, the situation, and the player. But in a perfect world, I'd draft Shedeur Sanders, sit him for a year, and build a solid team around him. Even if that means bringing in a veteran like, I don't know, Kirk Cousins for 1 season. I know that's not what everyone wants to hear, but I'm keeping it real. What do you think? Should we start a rookie right away, or let them sit and develop? Let me know in the chat. Alright, so let's keep this quarterback list rolling. We've already talked about Zach Wilson at number 5 and Shedeur Sanders at number 4. And, by the way, both of those guys are affordable. If you want to build a strong roster, you need to spend wisely at quarterback. But now, it's time for the most controversial pick on my list. Number 3 is Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, I said it. Aaron Rodgers. Now, before you lose your minds, let me explain. I have always been a huge Rodgers fan. Before Josh Allen entered the league, Rodgers was my favorite quarterback, and honestly, I still believe he might be the most talented quarterback to ever play the game. But here's the problem. His last season in Green Bay? Not great. His first season with the Jets? Injured. His return? Decent, but not elite. Yeah, he threw 28 touchdowns and 11 picks. But let's be real. The Jets weren't as stacked as people thought. Everyone said, just add Rodgers and they'll dominate. But that didn't happen. Their O-line was bad. Their offense was just okay. The defense, good, but inconsistent. Now, should Aaron Rodgers have won more than 4 or 5 games? Absolutely. But remember, when Brett Favre went to the Jets, he struggled too. Then he joined the Vikings and was 1 throw away from the Super Bowl. That's why I think there's a world where Rodgers has one last ride. A revenge tour. A chance to prove he can win without Green Bay. Of course, this all depends on the roster. If the Raiders build a solid offensive line and add weapons, maybe a T. Higgins or DK Metcalf alongside Jacoby Myers, who had 1,000 yards and 0 drops last season, Rodgers could be dangerous. So, what do you think? Is Rodgers worth a shot, or is his time up? Let me know in the chat. All right, let's keep this rolling. We're getting to the big names now. So far, we've talked about Zach Wilson, Shedeur Sanders, and Aaron Rodgers, but now it's time for my number 2 option. And I already know nobody's going to like it. It's Sam Darnold. Yeah, I get it. But hear me out. The Vikings just confirmed they're not using the franchise tag on him. That means they're not willing to pay him $55 million to be their guy. And you know what? That's actually good news. It means they know his market value is lower, and that also means we wouldn't have to break the bank to sign him. Look, I've talked about Sam Darnold so much that I might as well start a fan club. But let's be real. He showed something last season. Yes, his last 2 games were the biggest of his career. Yes, he finally had a chance to prove himself as a full-time starter. And you know what? He wasn't bad. With the right system and roster, I actually think he could thrive. But enough about Sam. Let's talk about my number 1 option. And I think most of us will agree on this. If we don't have to give up a first-round pick, my top choice is Matthew Stafford. Now, if you're okay with Aaron Rodgers at 41 years old, you should be even more okay with Matthew Stafford at 38. This guy almost took down the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles. That Rams roster? Good, not great. Imagine what he could do with a stronger team. If we trade for Stafford, we extend him, and we give him a 2-year deal. Boom. Instant contender. So now the big question. Stafford or someone else? Who would you take? Let me know. All right, let's bring this home. We've talked about options, but now it's decision time. So, if we get Matthew Stafford, what's the game plan? You either draft Shedeur Sanders and groom him under Stafford, or you go best player available. Maybe Jackson Dart or Will Howard. And let's be real. Stafford can change the culture overnight. Now, let's talk trade value. Would I give up a top 10 pick for him? Absolutely not. That would be insane. But if the deal is something like a second-round pick and Aiden O'Connell, maybe a second and a fourth, or even a first-rounder next year, now we're talking. Because with $100 million to spend, you can build a powerhouse around him. Imagine this. A new number 1 wide receiver, whoever that ends up being. Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers making plays, a top running back from the draft, Chip Kelly calling the shots, Max Crosby leading the defense. That's a playoff team. And let me be clear, if Stafford had been on a better team his whole career, he'd have more than 1 ring by now. I predicted the Rams Super Bowl when he went there, and he delivered. Now, let's settle this. If you had to pick one free agent QB, who are you rolling with? Zach Wilson, a cheap 2-year prove-it deal, $5 million per year. Aaron Rodgers, one last ride for $20 million. Who's your guy? Drop your answers below. All right, we've talked about quarterbacks, but let's throw in one more name. It's a name that's going to stir the pot. It's a name that's going to set Raiders forums on fire. But hear me out. What if Derek Carr was back in the mix? Now, before you start flipping tables, let's break it down. He started this season pretty well. 15 touchdowns, 5 picks. Then he got hurt. Early to mid-30s, and he's going to cost you almost nothing. I'm not saying he's the answer, but let's be real. If you need a bridge QB to keep things steady while a young guy develops, Carr could do it. And let's not forget, he never had a top 28 defense in Vegas. That 12-4 season in 2016 when he got MVP votes? Guess what? His defense ranked 30th. So imagine this. Pete Carroll rebuilds the defense. Carr hands the ball off, plays smart, and lets the weapons cook. You draft Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart, and they learn under one of the most experienced guys in the league. Now, I get it. People are going to scream, "Don't do it again!" But this time, everyone understands the assignment. There's no more debate. He's not top 5, he's not top 10. He's just a cheap, steady hand to bridge the gap. Would you take that deal? 1 year, $10 million? Drop your thoughts below. Now, we're almost out of time. But before we go, let's talk about free agents. I've got 3 names I want to throw out. These aren't guys we already have. These are players we might seriously target. Think big. Think bold. Who do you want to see in our lineup next season? Drop your picks in the comments. Let's go. All right, let's talk weapons. If you're rolling with Sam Darnold, Aaron Rodgers, or Shedeur Sanders, you need that big, reliable target. Someone who can go up, fight for the ball, and make plays when it matters most. Now, T. Higgins, love the guy. But let's be real. He's going to cost a fortune. And the more I think about it, the more I see him staying in Cincinnati. DK Metcalf? Maybe, but he's a trade piece, not a free agent. So let's focus on a realistic option. Chris Godwin. I know what you're thinking. He's been in the league forever. But guess what? He's only 28. Yeah, injuries have been an issue, but when he's healthy, he's a top 15 wide receiver. He won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady, and he's not going to break the bank like Higgins. Now, picture this: Chris Godwin, Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, Brock Bowers as your number one target, a quarterback with weapons everywhere. That's a dangerous setup. And before you say, "We need a true WR1," let me remind you, who was the Chiefs' number one target? Travis Kelce. Who would be our number one? Brock Bowers. Godwin and Myers as elite number two options? That's a scary offense. Now, let's switch to defense. We need a lockdown linebacker, someone who can run with tight ends and shut down passing lanes. Dre Greenlaw. Yeah, he had an injury-riddled season, but when he's healthy, one of the best coverage linebackers in the NFL. Time and time again, we find good tacklers, Divine Diablo, Robert Spillane, but coverage linebackers? That's a different story. Greenlaw comes from a high-powered 49ers defense. Plug him in next to Spillane, and suddenly you've got a duo that can handle any offense. And finally, let's talk defensive line. If you watched Super Bowl 59, you saw one name constantly wreaking havoc for the Eagles: Milton Williams, 25 years old, coming off a 6-sack season, a monster in the trenches. If we want a defensive front that dominates, Williams is a guy to watch. So that's 3 free agents to think about. 1, Chris Godwin, a reliable playmaking WR. 2, Dre Greenlaw, a coverage linebacker we desperately need. 3, Milton Williams, a young DT who could be a game changer. Who would you want to sign? Drop your thoughts below. All right, let's wrap this up. We've talked about Milton Williams, Chris Godwin, and Dre Greenlaw, 3 free agents who could make a huge impact. But let's be real, signing Williams, that would be a game changer. Why? Because in Super Bowl 59 he was an absolute nightmare for the Chiefs, but not for the reasons you might think. See, the Chiefs' O-line had to double-team Fletcher Cox, Jordan Davis, and Josh Sweat. That left Williams one-on-one, and he torched them. So imagine this: Milton Williams and Christian Wilkins in the middle, Max Crosby and Malcolm Kunze or Tyree Wilson on the edges. That's pressure from every direction. That's QB nightmares 24/7. And if you want to build a dominant defense, why not take a guy who just helped Philly do it? Now, let's talk offense. I know a lot of people are saying T. Higgins. I get it. But if we're going for value, Chris Godwin is the smart move. He's 28. He's affordable. He's still a top-tier playmaker. And if you line up Chris Godwin, Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, Brock Bowers, who the hell is stopping that? You double Bowers? Godwin burns you. You key in on the WRS? Bowers eats all day. This offense would be dangerous. And then there's Dre Greenlaw. I thought he'd be the underdog pick in this discussion. But turns out, you guys get it. A coverage linebacker is exactly what we need. Someone who can run with tight ends, shut down passing lanes, and hold it down in the middle. If we could sign 2 out of these 3 guys, that's a dream offseason. So here's the question. If you could pick 1, who are you signing? 1, Chris Godwin, the playmaker WR. 2, Milton Williams, the D-line disruptor. 3, Dre Greenlaw, the coverage linebacker. 4, other, comment your pick. Drop your thoughts below. All right, that's a wrap. We hit the 30-minute mark and I've said everything I needed to say. Top 5 quarterback targets? Done. Top free agents? Covered. Now it's your turn. Same time next week, Thursday 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. It's free and it helps out a ton. I appreciate you all. See you next time. Blast off.